Nobody answers.
Nobody answers. Everybody's just logged in because they have to log into the session. No point in joining the session if there is no interaction. That's why I left it, and I thought probably give it a couple of minutes and see, you know, who joins and who does not join and who talks and who does not talk. Right.
Actually, why it is so difficult to connect with this link? I'm not sure what's happening.
I haven't.
I was trying 5 minutes before 11, and it took me maybe 15 minutes to be connected.
Connection should be straight away, you know, there, because normally I'm logged in and I accept as you're joining in, I normally accept straight away. So it could be maybe because it asks you to do a bit of a registration before. So you put your name, email, and that basically does the attendance for us. But that, apart from that, I can't think of anything which will take much time, and it should be pretty much, you know, what do you call it? Instant.
But this link doesn't need any registration. It is a straight away.
My instruction very carefully. I spent 17 minutes sending that to you if there is a amount of people. Otherwise, we would start with my Fred, as you say, open the email, open the email, open the email, open the email. Later on the question, you need to sort this out, because what happens is this email gets converted into this holding system and allow by default pictures and everything to download. So everything comes. What he doesn't see is the things are written only in the opening up, and you will see that there is attachment and instruction in this. No, you can open double click on it. My class is running. So this should be enabled. Into settings, it should by default open. Local separately on the browser.
Right. So sorry about this. So just a quick one. What I want to find out is how many of you did the test yesterday of the survey, not a test, but basically a survey, which I'd asked everyone to take to find out what could be the best career option for you in health and social care. Did anybody go in and do that particular survey? So what I want to do is, before I start, I want to just briefly look at if anyone, you know, did the homework which was given yesterday. Let me share the presentation. So what we discussed yesterday, you know, was to talk about this bit, which was that I wanted most of you to go into, you know, a website which was called the healthcareers.nhs.uk. And on this particular website, what I wanted everyone to do was to do and take this particular survey, which allows you to then look at, you know, understanding what could be the suitable career option, because there are 350 different types of roles. So, you know, there was a discussion yesterday on taking this survey, which will take about 5 to 10 minutes. On the website by clicking onto this link, and this link would then allow you to go to the NHS Careers website, and on that it'll ask you to take a survey. That survey has multiple choice questions. Those multiple choice questions, by the end of it, when you answer them, there's nothing right or wrong, but when you answer them towards the end of it, it will give you an option to look at you know, what is the at least a suggested option for you to understand what would be the right or the correct or the best possible career option for you in health and social care. So how many of you went ahead and, you know, obviously took that survey which was on that link? Anybody? Now this is a website which I've opened up, and this particular website basically has that option of the survey. So how many of you went in and obviously, took the survey? Raise your hands if you had taken this survey. So how many of you did it? If this is something that you haven't done, then I would suggest, it is best to do this and take a screenshot towards the end of the day today, because this would give you a fair idea in terms of what would be the ideal healthcare role for you if you decide to work within this particular sector. And it should take, as per the guidance given on the NHS website, as you can see, it says it would take about 5 minutes for the survey, to happen, or to, to take this to get to the results. So there are some questions like, if I have a degree, so currently I have a level 7 diploma in health and social care management, which is a master's degree equivalent. So, and then it says you need to complete these 50 questions. So when I say let's go, it says working with babies, teenagers, or, do you dislike, I kind of don't like working with them. Working outdoors in any weather, I like. Working in the office, like very much. Working your hands in a skillful way, very much. Practical work. So all you have to do is, essentially go in and, basically look at writing, choosing the options, and that would basically give you the aspect of, understanding what kind of a career would be suitable for you in the health and social care sector, right? So some could be, answers wherein you have to just choose the options wherein either you like it or you don't like it. But essentially, those are the ones that you need to, just, it's a multiple choice test or a survey, essentially, not a test. And that would essentially allow you to complete this, bit. And as you can see, I've done 20. So it has taken me about a couple of seconds to answer the questions by reading it. And that, essentially would, be, what do you call, the bit that I want to look at when I'm taking this particular survey. I want to do it so that at least show you how to do this. And I will just about be finishing in a second. I can view my results now. And those results, if you see, it's just going to load my results. And then that tells me that, I can get into some of these careers: clinical oncology, obstetrics and gynecology, become an adult nurse. If I want to look at more matches, obviously there are lots of other careers: microbiology, administrative management, performance of quality management, physiotherapist, nuclear medicine, prison nurse, dentist, urodynamic science, emergency medicine. And then I can, if I think that these are the right careers for me, what it'll ask me to do is log in, and then it'll ask me to complete section 2. So in this case, what I would do is basically log in. and see if it allows me to, use it, or I need to register. Let's see. And it says, okay, I need to register for this site. And then what I will do is basically be able to continue to section 2. And that would be doing further, investigation into whether, this is something which is suitable for me or not. So essentially, this is something I would suggest that you should look at primarily because of the fact that this would be useful for you from a point of view of essentially, finding out about, what is it that you, want to look at from a point of view of, essentially looking at developing a career, in health and social care management. And I would primarily, look at, it's asking me to pick up some buzzwords, as you can see. And what I can do is basically, pick up some of these things. And if you want to sign into the free guide, you can do that. And once you've done that, essentially, it will take you onto the site, create your account, and then allow you to sign into section 2, which will be looking at much more details. There'll be some more videos that you'll be able to look at for the roles that you have been shortlisted, or at least you show qualities and attributes toward, and they would essentially be useful for you to look at, essentially exploring the roles, let me put it this way, which are available within the health and social care sector. So the 350 types that we talk about, will allow you to get into a bit more detail. So for example, the roles which are there, which have come in because of the, say, for example, the survey I've taken, it gives me an overview of the role and, what is involved, a career in medicine. And these are things which you can do. I know of somebody in my family who's 39 years old, and she has become a doctor. She decided to study medicine, and after 5 years, at the age of 44, she became a doctor, and she's a GP. So there is no right and wrong age to start a career. If this is something that you're passionate about, and I would suggest if you are and you're looking at working within this sector, then the ideal would be to look at basically, going into a bit more detail on this side, and then exploring what could be the areas of your interest and what kind of roles that you can, pretty much get into. Now, let's go back into, so for those of you who haven't done this survey on the site, I will show this link to you during our discussion again on the presentation. And I would suggest that this is something mandatory, which you should look at doing, all of you. And this will help you find a career option that you're suitable for by doing a survey, which will last not more than 5 minutes and will give you some options for you to look at from a point of view of pursuing a role or a career, or looking and seeking, if you're seeking a job in the, health and social care sector, in particular within the NHS. Now, a lot of you have joined. My suggestion is please try and join on time so we can, have an effective discussion on these sessions. Just a few housekeeping tips, which is to look at if you are asking questions, please unmute yourself. But otherwise, you can ask me a question through the chat route or the mic. You can unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, just keep it muted so that there is less and less of background noise, because this session is also being broadcasted on YouTube. And sometimes if you need to refer to this session again, what you'll be able to do is go into the YouTube channel that we have, and essentially, once you've joined and subscribed to the YouTube channel, which is UK Versity Online, what you'll be able to do is essentially watch or do a recap of this particular session, for the purposes of doing your assignment later. So as you can see, we are on the YouTube channel. This is a session which has been broadcasted live. So when you click on this, you'll be able to see the session directly from the YouTube. And after the session has been completed, what you'll be able to do is go under the live tab, and then you'll be able to see some of these sessions that I've done previously, specifically related to this level 3 health and social care course. So click subscribe on that channel. Obviously, we are looking at you becoming a subscriber for the time that you're studying this program with us or this course with us. And it'll be good to have you watch some of the previous sessions if you missed them out, and obviously gain some knowledge from what we've discussed in terms of the units we are covering. Now, going back to very quickly the learning unit specification. So today we are looking at covering the learning outcome 2 in this unit, which is personal and professional development. In the learning outcome 2, it is predominantly focused on understanding what is professional development in health and social care. So we will look at the concept of professional development and essentially discuss some of the assessment criteria which are involved in this learning outcome. It talks about identifying standards related to professional developments in health and social care. It also talks about assessing the needs for continuous professional development, or CPD, in health and social care. And there is one merit criteria which talks about how do you assess your development in terms of training needs, development needs for a particular chosen role in health and social care. So for those of you who are working, I would suggest it will be something which is a very good exercise, because you would need to assess your own training development needs, and that will need to be done for your chosen role or the role that you carry out or you work within this particular your organization or within the health and social care setup. So the 3 assessment criteria are going to be pretty much practical. Some part of it apart from the ones that we were in look at identifying and understanding the standards, but pretty much apart from the other apart from this, the 2.2 and 2M1 are predominantly going to be something which you will need to do yourself in order to essentially assess what are your training development needs from a point of view of looking at the requirements, so that you have the skills, knowledge, and the required training to be able to work well within your role. Now, for those of you who are watching, obviously let's say the session on a phone or a tablet, my suggestion would be to turn it into a landscape mode. We are already on full screen. There is nothing bigger that we can do on this in terms of the text which is on the screen. So the idea would be to try and obviously log in if possible through the laptop or a PC which has a bigger screen or a monitor. Now, going into the learning outcome 2, primarily, again, just a quick one repeat, which is understanding professional development. There are a few bits and pieces of things that we need to cover. We need to understand what are the codes or standard codes of practice within health and social care. What are the professional bodies within health and social care? And then obviously what we will look at is what is CPD, what is professional development, and then obviously, how do we look at maintaining ourselves and be up to date with regards to when we are working and offering services within this sector. Now, starting off with a key terminology, which is to do with the fact that we want to understand what is professional development. Now, this is something that we have discussed yesterday in the introduction of the unit, but I want to still do a bit of a recap. And the recap is primarily looking at, what is professional development. So when we talk about professional development in general, we are talking about how are you going to be looking at keeping yourself up to date with the process, using the process of learning. And this learning could be through the training route, could be through self-managed learning, could be trainings that you attend which are employer-led, and could be trainings or learnings that you get into which is done on your own, and they could be a part of your professional development plan. Or PPD, as we call it, personal professional plan or personal development plan. Now, the reason why we want to look at professional development is because some of the roles within this particular sector, health and social care, especially when you're working on a machine or using an equipment, you need to have up-to-date knowledge to be able to operate that particular piece of equipment. Now, if you don't know how to operate the software or the equipment, then the results which you are looking at would not be accurate. And in those cases, they would, interfere with the person looking at interpreting those results to then prescribe medication or some sort of treatment for the patient. A simple example that I would give you is, if you have, all of us, I believe, have seen a blood pressure monitor. So if I've seen a BP machine or a blood pressure monitor, you normally see that this particular device that we use, if I put it this way, this particular device, if I bring it here on the slide, blood pressure monitor is a device. Now we have electronic versions of it, but when you sometimes go to the surgery or when you go to your doctor or when you are in the hospital, obviously what they use this device to take measurements of your systolic and diastolic blood pressure. That means your higher and your lower blood pressure. So when we talk about systolic and diastolic blood pressure, we are looking at measuring heartbeats per second. And this is basically done by using a blood pressure monitor machine. Now, in this case, when it looks at monitoring your blood pressure and it gives a reading towards the end, we need to be able to know what does high blood pressure mean and what does low blood pressure mean. Sometimes we say, oh, I'm having a headache, and this headache, I have an acute headache on the side of or in the front of my head. Now, sometimes if this acute headache persists, you will get in touch with your GP or your surgery, and the GP is going to start looking at asking you some questions. And the questioning, that he does or she does is basically related to understanding the symptoms of why you're having this acute headache. Now, in order for the doctor or the GP to be able to ask the right set of questions to diagnose what is causing this pain, is the knowledge, is the skills, and is the information that he needs to get because of the fact that either he's got a degree, he's been doing this for a number of years, and he uses that knowledge and information to basically, exercise and obviously get the relevant information from the patient, and then gives a treatment or a prescription which will help the patient in, let's say, doing away with the headache, acute headache. Now, if we don't know how to read the blood pressure monitor and the symptoms of high blood pressure, so high blood pressure could be because you are stressed, maybe your heart is beating abnormally fast, you have high cholesterol. In some cases, it will also mean that they will, when I say they, I mean the GP would recommend you to do blood tests, additional tests, and that could be blood tests. When the blood test report comes out, they look at talking about things like LDL or HDL or bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, and see, what is the condition of your heart and why is it that, the heart is beating abnormally fast. Now, all this is a part and parcel of your learning and development. Now, if you do not have the right skills or knowledge to be able to, diagnose this problem, then as a doctor, as a GP, you wouldn't be able to provide and prescribe the right medicine. Now, if the nurse is not able to read the right readings from the blood pressure machine and the monitor and then note it down and provide it to the GP, the decision that the GP would take to prescribe a medication might not be correct or accurate, and that could lead to fatalities or, patient maybe having more severe sickness because the treatment or the diagnosis has not been done properly. So continuous learning is very important in this sector, and it is to keep yourself up to date with the developments, knowledge, information, which is required to be able to offer the best of possible care to the patients when you are involved in a particular type of role while working within the organization. Now, this particular learning outcome focuses on why is it important to maintain and have a training standard or a professional development standard, from a point of view of, your role. So when I talk about professional development in particular, in health and social care, it is going to be looking into that people who are working and providing care to patients have the ability to learn and develop throughout their careers so that they keep their skills and knowledge up to date and are able to practice safely and effectively, which is the key word, practice safely and effectively, and this allows them to remain in the profession. Now, if a doctor is found to prescribe medication which is not required, or for example, if there are anomalies in the prescriptions and the way the doctor is operating, then it can become he or she can be debarred from the General Medical Association, and he could lose his license to legally practice as a GP in the UK. So if you do not have the right skills, knowledge, and you do not apply them safely and effectively to provide care, the ramifications of this could be that you could lose your license, you could be barred from working as a doctor or as a nurse or as a social care worker, and that would be devastating for you. And that is one of the reasons why within any such profession within health and social care, it is important that you keep your knowledge, skills up to date. There is a focus on continuous learning and a focus on continuous learning and development within the job or the career option that you work with within the NHS, and that allows you to have a meaningful let's say career and provide services which are meeting the requirements of the patient. So an individual plan which is put forward, or is created by you and then reviewed by your manager, as we discussed yesterday, tends to be what is called a professional development plan. But if it is reviewed by your manager and is used for appraisals during your appraisals, which happen at the end of the year within your organization by your manager and other colleagues, then in that case, that plan, personal development plan, is then called the continuous professional development plan, or CPD, or career professional development plan. And that plan is a plan which is made specifically to suit you, your requirements of training and development, and it identifies a systematic way through which your educational and professional development needs can be met, so that you are provided training and given the options to look at development in the area, in your scope of your job, in your job area, so that you're able to perform those jobs or those tasks very effectively. So if I'm a nurse and if there are changes in standards which are being introduced, so one such example that I would give you is that if I look at the COVID pandemic, we've all come out of the COVID pandemic, and if you see, the use of personal and protective equipment, PPC, was made mandatory during COVID, is because of the fact that the infection, the people working within the hospital, they wanted to minimize the transmission of this infection and the virus. And that is where the mandatory use of PPE, personal protective equipment, was done. Now, there was basic training given to nurses, healthcare workers, people working within various wards within the hospital, the ICU unit, general ward, doctors, GPs, anybody who was working within the hospital. They were given guidance and training, and were asked to mandatorily follow these guidelines, like, so for example, face, covering your face, cleaning your hands, washing it with soap, and making sure that you're wearing the personal protective equipment when you're seeing patients, or you're providing care to patients who were diagnosed with or having COVID as a virus, in terms of to minimize transmission. And this was useful reason because it was looking at saving lives of both, not just the patient, but also for people who were working and supporting the patients, essentially, in terms of their journey to become better and obviously, recover from COVID if they were infected with the COVID virus. So obviously, this was very important. And one such area is that obviously when you attend conferences, when you attend trainings, when you go and attend professional meetings, or go and become a member of a professional body in your chosen field, you attend some classes or maybe take some workshops. This is all being done to look at gaining new skills. These skills could be learning how to use a machine, a new equipment which is being introduced, or in some cases looking at getting up-to-date information on how you would be using it to basically perform your job more effectively, and ensuring that you're providing care to the patients, in a much more systematic and policy-driven way, or following the policies and legislation which has been prescribed and they will all be, part and parcel of what is called the professional development. Now, there are lots of examples of professional development. If I'm looking at, say, personally, if I'm looking at learning to play guitar and I'm taking up some sessions with a tutor, and he's coaching me on how to develop, skills to be able to play a guitar. And this training or coaching that I'm taking from the individual, my tutor, is going to be considered as a professional development or as a training that I'm taking to be able to play the guitar on my own. And over a point in time, whether it's lessons or sessions that I take, 10 sessions, 15 sessions. Example, some of you, if you're looking at taking the driving test and you're taking driving lessons, essentially the lessons that you're taking is basically that you want to learn how to drive, and obviously look at some of the best practices in terms of how to drive. And when you take these sessions from the trainer, from the driving instructor, you're essentially looking at doing training to be able to, at some stage, pass the driving test, both theory and practical, and then start to drive on your own. And that would give you additional mobility or freedom to be able to travel to location. And, that is an example of, professional training or, in personal training. So if somebody is looking at doing it because they want to get a job as a driver within the NHS or one of the departments, or work with one of the, career roles within that, they would need a clean driving license, be able to drive lorries or trucks or whatever, and they need to take coaching and driving instructions or lessons, then in that case, that is going to be treated as what is called career professional development. In some cases, if you're doing it for the personal need, it will be called the professional development that you're doing, or personal development plan, PDP, that you're doing for yourself. Now, with that background in mind, let's look at understanding the first assessment criteria, which basically looks at talking about, things in terms of what are the professional standards required, or, standards which are required for professional development in health and social care. Now, there is one particular authority, which is called the PSA in health and social care, and that is the Professional, Standards Authority. And this Professional Standards Authority essentially, is a public body which oversees the regulation and registration of healthcare professionals, who are going to be working within this sector. Now, whether you're employed with a care home, NHS, or any such associated agency or contracting, company of the NHS, you are going to be registered with the Professional Standards Authority. And this is an authority which basically looks at promoting health and safety and well-being of patients, service users, and also members of public. And they are responsible for ensuring that all the regulatory conditions, which are basically legislation or acts, are followed when people are working within, with or within this particular sector with patients and providing services or care. Now, they tend to include things which are going to be related to legislation, things like acts that we are going to talk about. So what is the Health and Safety Act, the Care Act, or, the Minimum Wage Act, for example. These are some of the acts which are passed as, which are passed in the Parliament. And these then become what are called legislation, which the bodies need to follow. And when you work with a particular organization, if that legislation affects that organization or that particular business, then it is mandatorily a requirement of the organization to ensure that employees understand and have a very good understanding of how this legislation needs to be acted upon or implemented on, for the purposes of carrying out day-to-day responsibilities within the organization. And in some cases, when you join an organization as a new member of the team, you are expected to undergo training to understand that these are the bare minimum standards that you would need to adhere to, follow these guidelines, and these acts and legislations would need to be considered before you do or take any action in order to ensure that you're meeting the compliance and not, meeting the compliance essentially, and not being you're not offending, any such requirements which are essentially required mandatorily by law to be able to carry out your job responsibilities. And then we also talk about standards. Here we are going to be talking about the National Occupational Standards, the NOS. I will go into a bit of detail in the next slides. The NOS basically looks at the standards which are set when people start a job or a particular job role. What are the minimum requirements for you to become eligible to be able to take up that role is going to be something which is going to be defined under the national occupational standards, and they are standards for everything, but we are going to be looking at concentrating only on discussing the national standards, occupational standards related to health and social care. We're not worried about the national standards for how the railway operate, or how the airlines operate, or how some of the other businesses operate. We're going to be focused on understanding the NOS, National Occupational Standards for Health and Social Care. And then we have what are called the codes of practice. So when we talk about codes of practice, we are basically looking at codes of practice again in health and social care, because codes of practice in health and social care, or basically if we look at codes of practice, they are basically a list of statements that describe the standards or the professional conduct and practice which is required of people when they work within a particular sector. So here we're going to be focused on understanding what are the list of statements that describe the standard of professional conduct and practice required of social workers or social care workers when they go and do their daily job or their daily carry out their daily responsibilities in their job roles. So this is what we mean by identifying standards which are related to professional development. So we're going to be talking about legislation, the acts in general. We are going to be talking about the national occupational standards which are set for roles when you take up these job roles within the health and social care sector. And the third is what is the code of practice which is to be followed by people who work within this sector. And that is where we'll be looking at the 6 C's, or the 6 C's of care that every individual needs to be able to be aware of and follow when they are providing services or executing their job roles when they work within a health and social care setup. Now, let's look at some of the standards essentially first, which is legislation. So there are a lot of them, but what we want to be able to do is basically focus on the key ones which you should be aware of. So sometimes when we have seen from a point of view of business, you hear when you watch the BBC News, sometimes you hear the journalists talking about under the Freedom of Information Act 2010. Now, what is the Freedom of Information Act? So Freedom of Information Act, FI, A, is primarily an act or a legislation introduced by the Parliament, wherein there are public sector organizations, and if you need to take information or gather information about a public sector department or an organization or a government department, here under this particular act, you can, as a journalist, go and seek information and meet relevant individuals to be able to gather information which can be then shared with the members of public, because this is in the interest of public that the information is being gathered, sourced, and then essentially shared. So similarly, there are lots of different acts that we need to be able to look at within the health and social care sector, and some of the ones that we do feel I do feel that are important that you need to be aware of are these legislations that are put on the slide. So things like the Care Standard Act, the Domiciliary Care Regulation, the Health and Safety Act, the Manual Handling Operations Regulation, the Management of Health and Safety Work Regulation are basic minimum acts that you need to be aware of when we talk about maintaining professional conduct within while executing our roles within this sector. So professional development, when we talk about it, is going to be related to your employer ensuring that most of you are aware of these basic legislation, standards, and codes of practice when you are involved in doing your job role within the organization. So let's briefly look at some of these acts very quickly to understand these standards and legislations in particular. So the Care Standard Acts, basically the CSA in short, was introduced in 2002. It replaced the old Registered Home Act of 1984 and now includes parts of the Children Act, which was introduced in 1989. Now, this particular act basically is related to care homes and the standards that the care homes need to follow when they provide accommodation, and obviously look at taking care of the elderly within the within a particular setup. So the aim of this particular legislation was to reform the existing laws, which was the Registered Home Act, the Children's Act of 89, and ensure that the main principles of care which have been included and adopted by the National Health Service, the 6 main principles have been incorporated into the NHS, are taken care of when care homes and any such setup which is involved in providing primary, secondary, or anything to do with domiciliary care is adhering to or meeting the criteria. So these principles include providing dignity, privacy, choice or options to the patient, ensuring they are safe when they are undergoing procedures, and briefing has been done and discussion has been done with the patients to inform what would the procedure be, what are the outcomes of the procedure going to be, so that they feel safe while they undergo that operation or that procedure, and then also ensuring that equality and diversity are maintained when we do provide services within this sector. Or if I work with as an individual, as a health and social care worker within a hospital, then I'm looking at ensuring that these 6 principles of primary care are essentially followed as a part and parcel of my job role. Now, the second bit of act that we need to, or legislation that we need to be aware of, is the Domiciliary Care Regulation of 2002. Now, this applies to people who go and provide care and also do live-in as health and social care workers. We go and live in with the patients or clients in terms to help them to do their basic functions and cores. And this includes what is called the home care options, and they are split into 2. So carers which live within do a live-in. Say, for example, you might be a healthcare worker, you might go and stay with a particular patient for a week or so, do the basic course, and then obviously you'd make regular visits to ensure that the patient is doing fine. And the other would be people who provide domiciliary care, and this is where agencies which provide domiciliary care tend to be a part and parcel. And ensure that domiciliary care, when we look at providing this, they are adhering to the basic legislation which has been set, rules and regulations which have been set, and that includes things like a range of activities or services which are put in place to provide support to individuals in their own home. So, for example, if I have dementia or if I have a disability, then I would be looking at, the council would be looking at providing, a support and care within the person's home, and that would include or come under what is called the domiciliary care. Now, this act also then helps ensure that any such provider which is providing domiciliary care or does provide carers which go and stay with patients on a live-in basis for a certain amount of time to help them do their activities or daily course, also then meet the compliance set by CQC. And under the Care Act of 2014 and the Health and Social Care Act of 2008, they meet the regulated activities which have been set, and follow that procedure to ensure policies and procedures to ensure that they are delivering their responsibilities as per requirements of the Quality Care Commission. Now, the third act that we are all aware of, and I think we've all worked within organizations, Health and Safety, or HASFA as we call it, this particular act has been revised in 2012. And when we look at the short form of this act, it is also called the Health and Safety Act at Work. And this is basically an act which was introduced by the Parliament to ensure that if employers, when people work for employers or people work within companies, the health and safety of the individual is taken care of by the employer. And this means providing, say, safe services, premises, clean premises. It also includes things which basically employers need to ensure that employees are able to get in terms of a safe working environment. And if they are working with or working and providing services which are related to dealing with dangerous substances or, essentially a different kind of material, then they are provided the relevant, clothing or equipment to be able to deal with it, so that there are no detrimental effects the individual can have on its health and obviously on their lives. So health and safety is prima facie the responsibility of ensuring the health and safety of the individual, the employee or the staff. Even visitors, when people visit the company or the premises, is prima facie the responsibility of the employer, although there are responsibilities of the employees as well. But generally this rests, the bulk of it rests with the employer, and they have to ensure that they meet and have the compliance with this particular legislation, which is the Health and Safety Act, ensuring that premises, location, and the services that are provided under or the employees are asked to work with and provide under their particular banner, or in their office or in their site office, things like that, they are safe for the individual. We also look at the next act or legislation, the Manual Handling Operations Regulation. Now this was primarily introduced to ensure that when you're dealing with hazardous substances, for example, in the UK, I don't know how many of you recall, but a couple of years back, what we did see was that the use of asbestos, was banned. And the use of asbestos was essentially banned is because of the reason that it was detrimental to an individual's health, and it can cause or lead to some form of cancer. So when you're dealing with hazardous substances, so for example, if you work within a pathology lab, or if you work and deal with as a nurse, you look at blood samples and things like that, you have to make sure that you're dealing and having the right equipment to be able to deal with when you're dealing with substances which can cause infection or can cause transmission of diseases. So in those cases, this particular act can come in and has to be used to ensure that you have the proper protective equipment and tools and techniques being including training being made available, so that you're able to operate safely within a particular work environment. Now this also looks at the act wherein sometimes if you work within a warehouse, or we work within a place wherein you're required to deal with heavy material or any sort of material which could cause physical injury or can have a risk of injury because of the material, the way it is stored, or if it is not handled properly, then can cause a bodily injury. And in those cases also the employers are required to ensure that manual handling operations regulation is followed in order to ensure that there is no risk to life or no injuries can happen to employees when they are at their place of work and carrying out their responsibilities. A simple example is when you look at a warehouse, sometimes you have forklift operators. So when we talk about forklift, obviously in those cases, if you're operating a forklift or, a machine related to the forklift, for example, if I bring this picture onto the slide, we'll be able to see that if you haven't been given adequate training, and if there is a weight that you're trying to lift, which is more than 20 kgs, then obviously, there are restrictions and rules and regulations which ensure that you do not have a back injury or have a spinal injury. And that is where the employers need to ensure that if there are going to be dealing with weights which are going to be in excess of 20 kgs, then there are equipment which are available, and personnel who is going to be using the equipment are adequately trained and have the training being given so that they are able to operate that equipment safely without having any risk to any injury or any sort of, say, accident or incident which could happen. Now, we also talk about the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulation, which is introduced in 1999. So here, one of the key things and how is it different from health and safety at work is that this regulation requires employees to carry out regular risk assessments. Now, if you change premises, if you add anything new to your premises, or if there is introduction of new equipment and tools or techniques within, the office or your site or the operation of your or the place of your work, then adequate training needs to be done. But in addition to that, the risk assessment has to be done in order to ensure that there is no risk to people working with that equipment, and there is no risk to the premises or in general other employees which also work within those premises. And the main principle here is to provide access to competent health and safety advice, so that employees who are dealing with such equipment, it allows them to get information about what could be the risks associated with working within that place and how they can be essentially protected. So instruction and training is generally given to employees to deal with if there is an incident, if an incident is to occur in a location, then how would you go about dealing, and what could be the steps or the process that you could do or carry out in order to mitigate that risk or reduce that risk and reduce the risk of injury to you or yourself or your other colleagues. A simple example of this, what I will give you, is that when sometimes you look at, say, for example, if you are in a construction site, for example, if you are in a construction site and there are new things which are being built every day and the structures are coming up, then in those cases, sometimes you would see that the project manager or the site manager would essentially do a daily briefing to ensure that you are aware of what could be the dangers that you could face essentially when you are working in that location. And this is to give them the information so that they can avoid or mitigate those risks when and obviously in the long run avoid any injuries. And that is the reason why this Management of Health and Safety Act requires the employer to do risk assessments, and those risk assessments then help negate any issues or injuries which could happen or incidents which could happen, because a proper risk assessment allows you to discover or detect a chance of having some sort of an incident beforehand rather than you discovering it later. Now, we also quickly referred, we also referred to what is called codes of practice. Now, codes of practice, as I mentioned to you earlier, could be, any codes of practice, but we are looking at, list of statements or, list of rules and regulations which are prescribed and available within an organization, which employees need to follow in order to ensure that they are professionally conducting themselves, and also then providing these services which are in line with the requirements of, the standards which are set by the, regulators. So codes of practice for social care workers would tend to be a list of statements that describe how you go about professionally conducting yourself, and then practice, practice and use policies which are required to be able to give care or provide care to patients. An example of this would be that if you are an employee working with an organization, you're given an employee handbook, and that employee handbook is a code of practice because that tells you exactly what you can and cannot do, what you need to do if an incident or any sort of an untoward incident is to happen within the office, and who do you need to report to, and how you need to keep yourself safe and first, and ensure then the safety of others within the organization. So the adherence to these rules essentially policies and procedures to maintain compliance is what is going to be important and prescribed in what is called the code of conduct. Now, we need to look at the code of practice essentially for health and care social care workers. So there are 6 principles of or 6 codes which are essentially prescribed for the purposes of health and social care workers. And it says these are the 6 which I've written here, and it basically provides and talks about the 6 C's of care that we need to follow when you're working within a particular role in this sector. So a social care worker must protect the rights and promote the interest of service users and carers. They are looking at striving to establish and maintain trust and confidence. We are looking at providing and making sure independent service, and information is provided to the patient so that they are allowed to take and make independent decisions. You're also looking at ensuring that the rights of service users are protected, and there are no one or no people who behave in a way wherein the behavior of the individuals can cause harm to either themselves or the patients. And a social care worker will always look at upholding trust and confidence to making sure that they are delivering their they're executing their roles in accordance with the job description which is provided. And towards the end, you're accountable for the work that you teach, that you deliver, and this accountability is related to the quality of work that you do in delivering your roles and responsibilities. So there is a very good handout which I would suggest that you could look at referring to, and this is something that I would essentially ensure that you go through and read upon Moodle, because this is something which is going to be useful for you to understand that what would be the code of practice, especially for health and social care workers. And this particular handout is what I'm going to make available on Moodle along with the copy of this presentation. So this particular handout that you see, codes of practice for social care workers, what are codes, what they can be used for, and in general, what these 6 codes are explained here very nicely in a document, which is a 10-minute read. And I would suggest that this is something that you should go ahead and read in order to develop and get more or better understanding about the codes of practice that we are discussing in the presentation. Last but not the least, let's look at the National Occupational Standards. And again, when we talk about the National Occupational Standards, we are not looking at, generally referring to the National Occupation Standards, because they could describe the knowledge, skills, and understanding an individual needs to have when you are expected to do a particular job role. So here we are looking at focusing on the National Occupational Standards for health and social care in general. And that is what we need to be aware of when we talk about, the NOS for health and social care workers. So when we talk about the NOS, for the health and social care workers, I would again provide a bit of a document for you, which you need to look at reading. And that document, if I just switch you over to the, the document, that document essentially, a couple of pages, again, 10 minutes read, would essentially be useful for you to understand and read in terms of what is the basic requirements that you need to have in terms of skills, knowledge, and information, academic qualification to be able to work within the health and social care sector. And this is a particular small handout which basically talks about the requirements of what the National Occupational Standards prescribe for health and social care workers in particular. And again, a good read in terms of an article for you to develop your understanding on what is National Occupational Standards and what are these standards specifically for health and social care workers. So any questions on the discussion so far, what we've discussed? Any questions from anybody? Before we proceed into the second assessment criteria and the third one, which is more or less going to be related to you, what I want to do is, if you have any questions at this stage, I'll be happy to take. Okay. You can also raise your hand or, ask me a question through the chat route, which is absolutely fine. So let's go back to looking at discussing the second assessment criteria, which talks about assessing the needs of CPD, continuous professional development in health and social care. Now, because in the first learning outcome, we have looked at assessing our skills, we have looked at doing a skills audit, and we are looking at preparing a bit of a plan to, let's say, look at maintaining a plan or a document for career professional development, CPD. Sorry, which is a template which I also showed yesterday on the PowerPoint slide. What we want to be able to do is basically assess. So when we talk about, assessing, when we look at the word assess in particular, In general, if I look at talking about, the literal meaning, of the word assess. Now, when we talk about the word assess, what it basically means is we need to give careful consideration to all the factors or events that apply and identify why is it important or relevant for us to look at development or training. So when we look at the word assess, here, if I put the definition down, the meaning of the word assess would be here related to the fact that we need to give a careful consideration to the activities that we are planning to develop our skills and our knowledge and up to keep ourselves up to date with information which is required to perform in our roles. Now, when I say in our roles, what I mean by that is in the health and social care professional role. So it is vital for us to keep ourselves up to date, and what we need to keep up to date with regards to when we are looking at doing our activities or job responsibilities on a day in day out basis is we need to be updated with the current legislation. We need to be updated with our current regulation. What are the minimum regulatory procedures or requirements that we need to follow to be able to carry out our job on a day-to-day basis? Then what are the company policies and what are the best practices which are prescribed that we need to follow? And they, if are followed, allows us to do our job or deliver the job that we are being asked to do effectively on a day in, day out basis. And these, this reason of keeping us up to date is that we need to have this information which is meeting the criteria for today's requirement when we provide care to patients or services to patients, rather than have something which is based on 10 years old or 5 years old or an information which is a previous version of the information. Now, if we were to deal with the COVID pandemic, we have a lot of information at hand in terms of how to deal with the stop and spreading of this virus. Things like covering your face, using face masks, making sure you wash your hands if you're, if you're out and about, and then ensuring that you're using personal and protective equipment. Now, if you follow these three basic things which are required, from a point of view of when it was introduced, face, space, and mask, which is the three terms which were introduced by the government, during the height of the COVID pandemic, and the safe distancing or social distancing of 2 meters. The reason why it was introduced was that it was helping us save lives. So when you follow these best practices and you follow the policies or rules which have been prescribed, it is going to lead to people's life being saved. And that is what is required when you work with a professional within this sector or in this profession. You're required to then maintain and keep yourself updated with the information, requirements, policies, procedures, legislation, regulations, so that you're able to effectively deliver on your services that you're providing to patients. Now, when we talk about CPD, we also look at, sometimes CPD allows you to also keep yourself up to date from a point of view of, lifelong learning. Now, there are various ways in which we can maintain, CPD. Sometimes it is self-driven and sometimes it is employer-driven. So employer-driven would be when you look at basically undergoing, training. You are looking at basically attending webinars or seminars or conferences. They are going to be employer-driven. Now, sometimes CPD or professional development can be personally driven as well. That means you undertake research yourself. You read, about the information in books. You maybe go and watch a YouTube video. You are basically undertaking a college education in terms of, ensuring that you are getting a degree or a professional qualification, which helps you build your understanding and knowledge about a particular topic or a particular profession. And they are going to be self-driven. Now, when I talk about lifelong learning, sometimes you also look at lifelong learning, because lifelong learning tends to be a process that you are going to use. And in this case, you're going to be committing to ongoing learning which is going to be either on a voluntary basis, employer-led basis, or on a self-motivated basis. But what you're going to do is you're going to pursue knowledge, which is either going to be for personal or professional reasons. And this is going to allow you to build competitiveness and also improve your employability as an individual, wherein it improves your chances of getting a job or a higher position in a job in an organization, and also to a certain extent helping you discover the benefits of how training can enhance your personal life. Now, in those cases, we will be looking at undertaking what is called continuous professional development. Now, this particular task is asking you to assess why there is a need for you to look at continuous professional development and training when you are working within the health and social care sector. So what here you would need to do is essentially talk about the reasons why health and social care professionals essentially need to be looking at training and development on an ongoing basis, which allows them to be more competitive, more employable, and allows them to deliver services meeting the patient, in terms of when they are providing services for patient care. So you would need to take up a particular role. Again, this will take us back to the slide wherein it is important for us to understand what kind of role or a prospective career role that we can take within the NHS. When you have that particular role in mind, you would be able to assess what are the requirements that I need to look at from a point of view of training and development. So if I want to become a nurse, for example, in the next 2 years or 3 years, or maybe next year, join the uni, then I would be looking at undertaking a 3-year BSc nursing degree. And that 3-year BSc nursing degree is going to be important for me, because at the end of the degree, when I complete, I would be looking at becoming a nurse, and that would give me a fixed public sector job within a particular hospital or a department within the National Health Service, and that would help me put onto a good career path. So here, my needs of assessing the development that I need to do is going to take the route of a college degree or a university level education, and that degree would then help me become a nurse. So what you will need to do is look at an option and then see what are the basic requirements what are the requirements that you need to fulfill to be able to complete that particular goal. And that particular goal would then come across from assessing the needs of how you would go about becoming a nurse, or maybe a health and social care worker, or maybe a GP or a doctor or a radiographer, or any sort of profession that you look at taking up within the National Health Service or the health and social care sector. Now, this task is closely related to the merit task, because here you're going to be looking at assessing the requirements in a particular role. So my suggestion would be, when you look at doing the previous task and you decide that you're assessing it, say, for example, for becoming a nurse, then the idea would be to try and look at what would you try and look at? You would try and look at further requirements of how you would become a successful nurse. And that would be listed down as activities that you would need to undertake in order to become a nurse. And they would then be related to the chosen health and social care role that you've discussed in the previous task. And that would help you accomplish the merit criteria. So when I look at, an example in this case, the idea would be to try and look at a particular role, and that particular role that you look at would then help you understand and assess some of the requirements, of, I would say, a role in health and social care sector, which is what the requirement of the, let's say, the task is. So with this, we have covered the assessment criteria that we wanted to discuss. with regards to, the second learning outcome, which is to understand why is the requirement of personal and professional development important within the health and social care sector. Now, what I would want to do is take the opportunity of asking any questions if you have at this stage, so that we can discuss them and then bring this session to an end. Any questions, anybody at this stage? I will also try and provide, certain basic handouts which would help you cover the second criteria or the second assessment criteria, of this particular task. So when I look at, talking about continuous professional development of a chosen role, then this particular handout that you will see on Moodle is going to be looking at giving you an idea in terms of if you are looking at becoming a nurse, what would be the CPD activities that you would need to undertake, which will allow you to become a professional nurse and take up a career in nursing. And this will be specifically related to meeting criteria 2M1 that we have discussed with regards to today's task. So if I would suggest that there are lots and lots of different types of documents that are going to be available. And these documents which are going to be available are going to be quite useful for you to understand what is CPD, why it is required, and why they are useful specifically within the health and social care sector. So again, one of the documents which is going to be for an additional reading for you to help understand this topic of lifelong learning and continuous professional development is the document that I've shared with you, specifically related to health and social care in particular that we are seeing. And this would allow you to understand and build your knowledge in terms of the criteria 2.2, when we talk about career professional development for health and social care in general. So this is directly related to your topic, which is 2.2. Now, at this stage, I think what I would do is basically look at understanding, if you have any questions for me, and if I would want, if you want me to answer them in detail, I can do so now. Otherwise, we'll be looking at meeting for the next session next week to cover the learning outcome 3. And until then, what I would ask you to do as a bit of a homework, which I've said earlier, is to look at making sure that you do this particular survey, which is important to understand what kind of role you are having a fitment for within the National Service or the health and social care in general. And that would be, make sure you take a screenshot of it, save it, and that is something which will help you complete some part of the task and activities, in this particular unit. So hopefully, I hope you've enjoyed this session and you've gained some knowledge today that we have discussed regarding learning outcome 2. Thank you so much for joining, and I will catch up with you next week to discuss learning outcome 3. Until then, take care and thanks for attending.
Thank you so